In this video, we're going to look at 12 essential anchor phrases for por versus para. Now, if you've ever struggled with these two Spanish words, you're not alone. Whenever you need to ask, what is this for, or say thanks for, or sorry for, your instinct will be to decide between por versus para, since both can mean for. But ideally, you want to avoid having to make a decision at all. Now, I've talked a lot recently on the channel about avoiding logic-based decision-making. Rather than having a rule in your head that says, in this situation, I need to use this word, or I need to apply an exception in this case. Instead, you can have a set of memorized phrases that will allow you to use por versus para without having to make a decision. Now, this is where anchor phrases come in. An anchor phrase is a short phrase you can memorize that will help you use the correct word in Spanish without applying any logic. And an example in reverse would be a native Spanish speaker trying to figure out how to say this in English. Vivo aquí desde hace 3 años. A Spanish native who is learning English might think that desde means since or from. So applying logic, they might come up with something like, I live here since 3 years, or I live here from 3 years. Now, as an English native, you would know that the best way to say this in English would be, I've been living here for 3 years. So if I was teaching English, I would say a really useful anchor phrase would be, I've been doing something for a period of time. So you could say, I've been studying for 2 years, I've been traveling for 3 months, or I've been working there for 6 years. So rather than applying a decision-making tool to get desde to since or from, memorize this phrase and practice it over and over so you don't have to make any decisions. And of course, this works in reverse. So for you, the anchor phrase in Spanish would be, hago algo desde hace periodo de tiempo. So for example, estudio español desde hace 3 años. But that's a bonus anchor phrase for this video. Let's now switch our focus to 8 useful anchor phrases for por. Now, these will be short phrases that are important in daily conversational Spanish and always use por, never para. So the first anchor phrase will be gracias por, thanks for. So when we want to say thank you for something in Spanish, we always use por. So for example, someone maybe has come to your party and you just simply want to say, thanks for coming. Gracias por venir. Now, maybe they bring you a present and you want to say, thanks for the gift. You can say, gracias por el regalo. Then imagine your friend gives you a hand with homework. You might want to say something like, thanks for helping me. Gracias por ayudarme. Now, note that when we follow gracias por with a verb, we don't conjugate it. We say gracias por venir, gracias por ayudar. And in this last example, we add me on the end. So it literally sounds like, thanks for to help me. Now, I know some students like literal translations as it helps them learn the pattern. Now, the next anchor phrase is similar. It would be, lo siento por, I'm sorry for. So similar to gracias por, when we need to say, I'm sorry for something, we always use por. So here's some examples. I'm sorry for arriving late. Lo siento por llegar tarde. I'm sorry for the noise. Lo siento por el ruido. I'm sorry for what I said yesterday. Lo siento por lo que dije ayer. Now, this last one uses the phrase lo que. Now, I've done a video on lo que that is worth watching if you haven't seen it already, or you just need a refresher. I'll leave a link to the video in the description. Now, the next anchor phrase you'll hear all the time, por si acaso, literally means for if by chance, where acaso is an adverb that means by any chance. Now, we can use this phrase whenever we say just in case in English. So if you want to talk about doing something as a precaution, even if you're not sure it's necessary, then this is a really useful phrase. For example, I'll take an umbrella just in case it rains. Llevo una paraguas por si acaso llueve. I'll save a copy just in case I need it. Guardo una copia por si acaso la necesito. I'll leave the door open just in case someone else arrives. Dejo la puerta abierta por si acaso llega alguien más. Now, note with all of these examples, I've used the future in English. I will take, I will save, I will leave the door open. Whereas in Spanish, they're all in the present tense. Llevo, guardo, dejo. In Spanish, for near and immediate actions like doing something in the next 5 minutes, we almost always use the present tense. Whereas we can't do this in English. Like, I take an umbrella, it doesn't sound right. So when you are practicing with this phrase, por si acaso, if you are about to do something, stick with the present tense. This usually doesn't come easily if your first language is English, but it will make your Spanish sound more natural. Next, let's look at another very useful anchor phrase with por, and that would be por ejemplo. For example, again, this is always with por, never para. So here are some examples. For example, I like many sports such as soccer and basketball. Por ejemplo, me gustan muchos deportes como el fútbol y el baloncesto. There are many tropical fruits, for example, pineapple and mango. Hay muchas frutas tropicales, por ejemplo, la piña y el mango. They speak several languages, for example, Spanish, English, and French. Hablan varios idiomas, por ejemplo, español, inglés, y francés. Now, note how por ejemplo can come at the start of a sentence, in the middle, or we can even say it at the end informally in conversation. Like we could say, me gusta esto, por ejemplo. There's nothing wrong with that. The next anchor phrase, pasar por, to pass by or to go through. Now, what makes this a perfect anchor phrase is that por always indicates movement through, along, or via a place or situation. So here are a few examples. We walk through the park every day. Pasamos por el parque todos los días. I'll stop by your house later. Voy a pasar por tu casa más tarde. He's going through a difficult time. Está pasando por un momento difícil. Now you can see how por carries the sense of for, meaning through, whether it's a physical space like el parque or an emotional or difficult life situation, un momento difícil. Now let's look at another common por phrase, and that would be preocuparse por algo. So to worry about something. So in Spanish, you always say preocuparse por, never para. So let's look at a few examples. Don't worry about me. No te preocupes por mí. I worry about your health. Me preocupo por tu salud. She worries a lot about her children. Ella se preocupa mucho por sus hijos. The next anchor phrase is cambiar por algo. So to trade for something. And whenever you're talking about swapping one thing for another, Spanish always uses por. So for example, I exchanged my coffee for tea. Cambié mi café por té. You can exchange those shoes for a bigger pair. Puedes cambiar esos zapatos por unos más grandes. So do you want to trade my sandwich for your salad? ¿Quieres cambiar tu bocadillo por mi ensalada? Es una buena oferta. Es una ganga. It's a good deal. It's a bargain. Now, in each of these examples, por marks what you receive in exchange. It's the thing that replaces something else. Now, up until now, we've been focused on por. So let's switch and look at the first anchor phrase for para. Now, we just saw how cambiar por algo is about exchange. We can flip that idea when we're not talking about trading one thing for another, but instead talking about something changing for the good or for bad or for better or worse. Then we can say cambiar para mejor, cambiar para peor, cambiar para bien, or cambiar para mal. So to change for better or to change for worse. Now, whenever I teach prepositions, I explain to students that these words are always hard to translate in isolation because they don't follow rules or patterns. So we can't just generalize the word para or por. And this goes for many languages, from Russian to Italian or French to German or English to Spanish. It doesn't matter. Prepositions always turn up in weird ways when we go from one language to another. So words like por and para and de, con, desde, a, en, we have to learn these words in combination with other words. And that's what this video is all about learning por and para in common anchor phrases. Now, you've seen that pasar por and preocuparse por always go together, but then we have this weird situation where por and para can both turn up with cambiar, right? So it's worth learning cambiar with por and cambiar with para. Now, there are very few verbs in the Spanish language that will combine with both por and para, but it's worth highlighting that cambiar is a very common one and worth practicing. So for example, here are some expressions you'll often hear with cambiar para. So things changed for the better. Las cosas cambiaron para mejor. His attitude changed for the worse. Su actitud cambió para peor. The situation is changing for the better. La situación está cambiando para mejor. So this is a really good one to practice. Cambiar para mejor, cambiar para peor. Next, we have another anchor phrase with para, one that you'll constantly hear every day in Spanish, and that's servir para. Literally means to serve for or to be used for. But idiomatically, it's the way Spanish expresses what something is meant to do or whether it's useful for a particular purpose. So here are a few examples. This button is for turning on the light. Este botón sirve para encender la luz. This key is used to open the garage door. Esta llave sirve para abrir la puerta del garaje. The car is suitable for the city, but not for rural areas. El coche sirve para la ciudad, pero no para el campo. Okay, now let's flip this last phrase into a question for the next anchor phrase, given how common and important it is for conversational Spanish. So we could say, ¿para qué sirve? What is it for? Now, this is one of the most common ways to ask about the purpose or function of something in Spanish. So, for example, what is this for or what does this do? ¿Para qué sirve esto? Something specific might be like, what is vitamin D for? ¿Para qué sirve la vitamina D? So, what's the use of keeping all of these papers? ¿Para qué sirve guardar todos estos papeles? Now, notice how useful this question can be in everyday conversation. You can ask about objects, tools, situations, or abstract ideas. You can also use it in a slightly humorous or ironic way. You could say, what's the use of this manual if no one reads it? ¿Para qué sirve este manual si nadie lo lee? Now, finally, let's visit a classic phrase using para, and that would be para siempre, forever. Now, unlike other anchor phrases on this list, por siempre is possible but incredibly rare. It usually only turns up in poetry or maybe the lyrics in a song. So here are some examples. Friends forever. Amigos para siempre. Now, some of you may remember this was the theme song for the 1992 Olympics. This probably dates me a little bit, but if you don't know it, look it up. It's a bit of a cheesy song, but it can really get stuck in your head. Next example. I want to stay here forever. Quiero quedarme aquí para siempre. This isn't going to last forever. Esto no va a durar para siempre. And to finish with a little extra emphasis, we can also say para siempre jamás, an idiomatic way to say forever and ever. So after watching this video, I'm hoping you're going to say something like, I'm going to remember these phrases forever and ever. Voy a recordar estas frases para siempre jamás. So what do you think about the anchor phrases approach to learning difficult topics in Spanish? Do you know of any other examples of anchor phrases for por versus para? Let me know in the comments. Now, if you want to go deeper on the topic of por versus para, check out this video here, where I explain how we can think about motivation to choose between por versus para. This is an area with these two prepositions where it gets much harder to come up with anchor phrases. You can also check out the original video where I use anchor phrases to help for the choice between estaba, estuve, era, and fui. I'll leave that here. And if you want more tips from me, we have a weekly newsletter that we send out every week called Español de la Semana. I'll leave a link to the newsletter in the description. Okay, till next time, hasta pronto.